What's going on, guys? So let's talk about Weapon H, working for Roxxon Corp, his connections to the War of Realms, and why Dario Agger, the Minotaur, said that Weapon H is the only person who can stop what's to come. So if you are new to the channel, be sure to subscribe so you catch the spills every week, and don't forget to hit that bell up top so you can squad up in the comments for the first hour. Alright, so just hopping right into it, in our last video, we broke ground on the new series God of Thunder Reborn. We talked about what is the War of Realms and why the narrative jumps from the present day and into the future, and unconventionally closes the gap, which is the War of Realms, which is the narrative that takes place sometime in between. But along the way, we have different series that are filling in that gap as well, Weapon H being one of them. Because Dario Agger, CEO of Roxxon Corp, who has been pursuing Weapon H, he made a deal with Malekith, who's in pursuit of the 10 realms, and for Dario Agger, in return, he would get access to valuable resources from each realm. And according to this agreement, it would make Dario Agger the absolute ruler of Midgard. And with the two of them as members of the Dark Council, different rulers would have different realms. Malekith with more than one, which among the council, it was almost like him owning more shares. And each member of the council would work under Malekith, but in return, it was like they would have their own realm to themselves. And for most of the members in this council, which we talked about in the last video, for many of them, this was an alliance that they made to secure their own power in their realm. With your exceptions, with such as Laufey, who was already king of Jotunheim, but he owed the debt to Malekith for bringing him back to life. But even with that, you kinda gotta be alive to be a ruler, because if you're not, people just gonna kind of start doing their own thing and find someone else that they want to call king. So when Malekith strategically brought back Laufey, he really looked at the Dark Council as pieces on a chessboard, with the 10 realms being the actual board itself. And as far as the different creatures and life within each realm, he treats them as pawns. The Dark Council are more like his knights, but at the end of the day, his strategy is basically king safety. Because in his eyes, any of them are expendable as long as he rules the board when it's all said and done. And for Malekith, there is no limitation to whoever or however many people must be sacrificed in order to obtain his victory. And so for Dario Agger, after making this agreement and beginning to violently industrialize portions of the different realms, he had fulfilled part of what he wanted. Because remember, as we mentioned before, he really wants the 10 realms for himself. But where we're at now in the Weapon H series, he's already tapped into this insane amount of power and set up shop in these different realms and becoming the biggest company in the world with over 100 million employees as a product of the insane resources that he had been obtaining. But recently, he's run into a huge problem, because with reaching into multiple realms, literally by way of pulling raw energy through multiple doorways, he now has the issue of a number of creatures trying to pass through. And if these unknown creatures that are literally coming from any and everywhere get onto Earth, it's a wrap. And he knows that. So initially he had started his own means of finding his own solution to combat this, but all priorities shifted when he discovered Weapon H. And when he discovered Weapon H, he put all focus and resources towards him. And not a lot came up because the Weapon X program, it was very secret. At this point when it relaunched, people had thought it had been long gone. Clay's identity was publicly listed as deceased, and all this mystery made Dario obsess even the more. But the incident that brought Weapon H to Dario's attention was really an isolated incident that he initiated by creating a Wendigo, and not like your regular Wendigo, but like supersized with fries. And this is an incident where we talked about in the previous video, where he let out some scientists into an isolated area where he had one of them eat like a genetically modified version of Wendigo jerky, and that's what transformed him into this huge giant Wendigo that lashed out on the other scientists. And this experiment was thoroughly planned out because he had them stranded hundreds of miles into the wilderness, so when the subject transformed, they would do what they needed to do to capture the Wendigo and bring him in, most likely to use the Wendigo as a defense for whatever would pass through that doorway. But because Clay, who was Weapon H, was also looking to be in isolation, he ended up crossing paths with them. Seeing they were stranded, he killed a deer, gave him food to eat, but when one of them turned into a Wendigo, he turned back around. And so previously when talking about this, we also mentioned that Doctor Strange had seen this fight with Weapon H and the Wendigo, the giant Wendigo, because he's already aware of a number of strange happenings. In different Wendigo who wasn't quite that size, who he was already tracking before. And for this reason, he chooses to intervene, but he's already aware that Weapon H, though appearing to be the worst parts of Wolverine and Hulk put together, he can already tell that this quote Hulkverine, and that's what everybody really calls him who doesn't know that he's Weapon H, or they don't just know that his name is Clay. But Doctor Strange is aware that this guy is just more than blind rage, because from observing the situation, he sees that Weapon H just isn't on this blind warpath, but he's protecting the remaining scientists. And for that reason, Strange goes in with the intention to help him subdue this beast and then figure out more about Weapon H to really see if he is a friend or a foe. Because once again, he is very new to the scene. Nobody knows this guy. And as a precaution, if nothing else, you have to know more about him to make your own judgment to say, okay, is he a threat? Is he an ally? Because it's clear as day that he's dangerous. And it's for that reason that Strange pries into his mind, exploring the source of his anger, only to find that he is not driven by anger, but more so driven by the goal of keeping his wife safe and secret, because he knows if anybody finds her and they connect the dots and figure out who he is, her and their children can either be used as a bargaining chip, or they can possibly be killed by any enemies that he's made. So it wasn't like he was being driven by anger, but that made him angry though. Prying into his mind and getting in his business. It's almost like looking over somebody's shoulder and looking in their phone. But when Clay leaves, Dr. Banks, who was like the android who led them out there for this experiment, although being a damaged android, he did get some footage back to Roxxon where Dario Agger reviewed the footage, realizing, okay, this guy we may not know a lot about, but we do know that he has a heart to protect people. And this observation is important because this is going to come into play for Dario Agger selling the idea to Clay of working for Roxxon Corp, because the creatures breaking into the realm are only one part of the full scale of how he wants to use Weapon H. And it's from here that Dario goes through the process of testing Weapon H by putting innocent people in harm's way so he would have to go out and save them. And his method of doing this did a few things, because initially with him laying low key and most of these instances happening in an isolated area, and then these incidences switching to areas where more people were at risk, which was intentional on Dario Agger's part, but as a result, this made more people aware of who he was, and it started servicing more clues for his wife, who believed that he was still alive, to get closer and closer to finding out what happened to him, finding out where he was and what he had become. And in a cascade of events, initially with Dario Agger not aware of who his wife was, which is actually an employee for Roxxon Corp, but as it turned out, with her following Clay from tracing instances that were similar to Clay, this also surfaced more clues for Dario Agger to investigate, because the rocks she turned over pointed to Weapon H. And it's pretty dope how these things indirectly feed one another, and I'll get more into it in just a second. But another thing I thought was pretty funny is that when people seen him with just his claws out, like at regular size, because he can do either or. And I explained how earlier on this playlist when I explained his different abilities or whatever. But it's funny because like when people see this, they look at him like, "Are you Wolverine?" And he's like, "Nah, man, like I swear one more person ask me that question, I'ma lose it." But what I meant by Clay's wife Sonya and both Dario Agger following the similar leads. With Sonya, she was looking for Clay. The whole story about him being dead just didn't sit right with her, so she did more digging, and that's how she came across Anston Davies, who's a retired veteran who formerly served with Eagle Star. He had served on the blue team much like Clay, and he's the oldest living member of that section. And when he also heard the bogus story of how Clay died, it didn't make sense to him, because he knew Clay, just as a soldier, wouldn't have been taken out that easily, because the report just said that him and some other men were taken down by some pipeline workers. And that didn't make any sense, because him and Clay were trained with a number of different fighting styles from 4 continents and 3 different planets. So how did the couple guys with tools take down these armed men with intense training? And so for Dario Agger, studying and following Weapon H, he took notice of his fighting techniques, and with his resources, he came to the conclusion that Weapon H was a former member of Eagle Star. And that's what led him to Anston Davies, because the mission that Clay had been said to be killed upon, the Eagle Star blue team who had been sent had actually been assigned to clear out an area for Roxxon Corp, and the workers who were there, they were just sitting on the tracks hoping to shame Roxxon and stop them, but instead the blue team had been given orders just to go right through them. And this really lines up with the flashbacks that we saw Clay have when he initially escaped from Weapon X, because he recalled seeing these soldiers that had the same Eagle Star badge that he was wearing, slaughtering all these people, and then in turn he turned on the soldiers because he knew what they were doing wasn't right. And that entire story really just got flipped around because Eagle Star took him in alive, and from there he was sold to Dr. Alba in Weapon X. And it's very likely that this happened with Eagle Star being under the assumption that he was just going to turn out like the rest of Weapon X's subjects, who many of which died a horrible death, all in the name of science. But Dr. Alba intentionally killed those subjects to gain solid information so that she can construct the perfect weapon when she found a worthy candidate. But as far as Clay making his way from point A to point B, trying to stay away from his wife to keep her safe, but also running into a number of situations of trouble with Dario Agger, sending all these different obstacles in his way, eventually Weapon H runs into Man-Thing. And I did a video previously on Man-Thing a while back when we were talking about Contest of Champions going into the Thor Ragnarok film, and I got a link in the description for that if you guys want to know more about his origin and his background. So feel free to check that out. But the main thing that if you don't know anything about Man-Thing, the main thing that you need to know for right now is that when he touches someone, according to their fear or their level of fear, they'll burn. If you have no fear, then you won't burn at all. If you have a little fear, then you'll just get, just a little hot, perhaps even bearable temperatures. But if you have a little more fear, then it starts to get a bit flaming. And I ain't talking about leaving the perm in for too long and then you can't wash it out because the water cut off. And shout out to everybody getting perms in 2018 still saying you Dominican. Let me bring it back before I digress too far. But once again, with Weapon H running into the Man-Thing, we find another instance of Roxxon tampering with the creature to enhance its strength in some way or fashion. And much like their experiments with the Wendigo, Roxxon had enhanced the strength of Man-Thing by giving him an upgrade, so to speak, derived from the DNA of Groot. And that is insane because he's already strong, like Rumble with the Hulk strong. But then you add Groot on top of that? That's crazy. And once again, I'm sure this was in provision for what's about to enter our realm, but this enhanced strength also allowed Man-Thing to get a better grip on Weapon H and hold him for longer, which would cause him to burn at any sign of fear. And when it comes to Clay, he doesn't fear for himself because he can handle himself, but when it comes to his wife and his children, and especially now when he feels like he has to stay away from them in order to keep them safe, the simple fact that he cannot physically be there to protect them, it terrifies him. And the equivalent of flames follow. And if you think back to Doctor Strange looking for this source of anger because he's a Hulk, but instead finding love and the fear for the ones that he does love, and then seeing the amount of that fear when he encounters Man-Thing, who usually just gives you a flaming body at most. And in this case, Man-Thing was only added the attributes of Groot, only to make like his hold stronger and perhaps quicker regeneration. But the size of that combustion just goes to show you what drives this Hulk. And not just that, but what drives Clay as a man. But the size of this combustion, this explosion, to say the least, it got a few people's attention. One of which was Dr. Ella Sterling, who's the doctor that he saved from the giant Wendigo, which I believe they call it your Wendigo. But Dr. Sterling, who was being followed by Sonya, told Sonya about the encounter in Alaska and how Dr. Strange had shown them that she was the predominant thought on Weapon H's mind. And from that moment she knew she was looking at Clay. But he is more concerned with keeping her alive, and he hasn't completely figured out how to do that at this point, so he's just telling her to run. But from her perspective, she's like, I just found you, I'm not going anywhere. And with no time to think, he just throws her and Dr. Sterling in the water because Man-Thing is still coming at him, there's Roxxon choppers coming in, and it was really just the best option at the time. But with doing this, even though he was able to stop Man-Thing and keep Sonya safe, this left him vulnerable to Roxxon, who had used a combination of elf sorcery and binding spells as a method to capture and obtain Weapon H. And keep in mind, Dario Agger is a collector of these sorts of things. So aside from him working with Malekith, who is a dark elf and worked with him in slaying a number of the light elves, it only makes sense that he would add some of their sorcery to his collection. Like, he still has the living heads of the pirates that killed his family. Like, this guy doesn't throw stuff away. And so now this elfish binding spell that he's using to constrain Weapon H. It's not gonna hold for long. So Dario has to give his elevator pitch quick. And it's not really a good one because Clay has heard it all, because he's used to being used in order to kill people. And now that he's the most dangerous hero on the planet, he doesn't see that changing. And he doesn't even let Dario finish the entire statement because Dario didn't want him to kill people. Or at least not yet. Like, I don't want you to do that now. Like, you know, we'll do that later on. We'll warm up to it. But Clay cuts him off because he's tired of being used. But Dario has a backup plan for that. And he's like, okay, that's cool. I'll just drill out your brain and you won't remember a thing. And I'll just make you do what I want. But when Clay looks at him and says, I will remember you. Dario's like, okay, damn it. Didn't think of that. Change of plans, take the whole brain out. Like he is terrified. Like I swear, if Man-Thing would like step on his toe, the human race as we know it would be gone. Wiped from existence because of 4 words that scared the pee out of this man. But he totally lost it. He doesn't care about him losing muscle memory and all of his training. He's just like, I don't want this guy to remember me. But when that spell broke, Dario was out. And even though he's the Minotaur and the most capable person in the room, he was the quickest one out. Very much like Dustin from Stranger Things 2. Like he knew what he did, but he also knew that if Weapon H were to tear the Roxxon headquarters apart, that he would destroy the portal door as well, unleashing every nightmare on this earth. But on his way out, Clay also sees the Brood pilot and Man-Thing held in captivity. And the Brood pilot, like throughout this whole series, this dude is hilarious. Like in a Weapon H movie, you'd have to get like a Chris Rock or a Kevin Hart to play this dude. Like he is hilarious. Because when Clay is making his way out, he's just like, hey man, you passing this way, man. Just cut the cage open, it'll take like 2 seconds. Just the whole tone of this guy. He's like, help a monster out, man. Come on, bruh. I love it. Like he is written well. He's hilarious. But after freeing them and cutting his way through, Dr. Sterling and Sonya, who made their way inside through Sonya's clearance and then sneaking the rest of the way, they find Clay and the others only to be met shortly after by the return of Dario Agger. And Dario was still there because he needed to secure the portal room. But he didn't show his face until this point because once he overheard the conversation between Clay and Sonya, he had finally been able to put a name with a face, finally identifying who Weapon H actually was. And his sales tactic of acquiring Clay's help changes here for the better because he's like, okay, you can go. I'm not trying to get in your way, but I want to show you something. Because when you walk out that door, everything you know and love will be destroyed by the creatures that pass through this doorway. And Dario believes, like he truly believes, that Weapon H is the only hero capable of facing what's on the other side. Because Weapon H, once he found out about him, he was the only person that Dario sought after to face this threat. And with taking him to the portal room, knowing that Clay will not be able to walk away from the opportunity to defend those who cannot defend themselves. But at this point, he knew that he had an ally for the moment. And of course, Dario's not going to tell Clay about Malekith and their arrangement, or even less than that, he's not even going to tell him about his plans to take over the 10 realms, overthrowing Malekith. But because Dario is so manipulative, he's going to play this one move at a time by using the laws of power and knowing what others want in order to get what he wants. Because after Weapon H saves Earth, or better yet Midgard, the next threat that Dario is likely to point to will be Malekith. And it's likely that Dario will play the role of, look, I may have some questionable methods, but I was only just trying to save the world. And this will work for the foreseeable future. But when Clay discovers Dario for who he really is and what he's been doing, aside from taunting Clay and pretty much trolling him, when Clay finds out that once again, he's been used as a means to an end, he is going to get that tired angry. That's way past your angry. That's tired angry, ultra tired. And at that point, Dario's gonna need every spell he can find to cover his hide. No pun intended. But that'll do it for this one, guys. I want to know, what do you guys want to come through that door? Coming from wherever throughout the 10 realms. I can't wait to see what you guys say in the comments, and this is gonna be good. But let me know your thoughts down below, and we'll do it again on the next one. All right, later.